Hi, this is Crystal with the Nacogdoches Public Library, and back again with the Adult Art Series, and we're sort of catching up with some requests that we had. I did a beginning embroidery workshop a couple of months ago, seems like forever ago, and I had a resounding response that people wanted to have a second level. So I'm going to start out with just a quick reminder of some of the basic stitches, and then we'll try some that we didn't get a chance to get to in the workshop last time. I'm using a really loosely woven fabric and a large eye needle with a full strand of embroidery thread, and that's so that you can see it clearly, and it's pretty easy to work with. But you can do this with a more tightly woven material and a smaller needle, and you can separate the strands of the embroidery thread. If you have questions about that kind of thing, you can leave us a comment or send me a message and I'll help you out. So the basic stitch is the running stitch. I don't think we probably need to review that, but I think it's nice to have a visual of the different stitches so that if you're looking at patterns, you can see what they're talking about as you're reading the pattern. So we're gonna do a back stitch, and we're just gonna come up through the back of the fabric, and I've got a line here so that it'll keep us going straight, but you don't necessarily have to do that, especially with this loosely woven fabric, because you can see the holes pretty clearly. And I'm gonna go one stitch ahead and back down. And then I'm going to come up one stitch forward from the back. And then the back stitch part is that you're going to go back through the hole that you made when you were going back on the first stitch. And so that just makes a straight line with no gaps. I'll do this just a few more times. So again, you're just going one stitch forward. And remember from our lesson before, you're not pulling it very tight, because especially with this loose fabric, because you will stretch it out of place or make a really tight stitch next to a very loose stitch, and you don't want that. I'm also learning, as I'm doing these videos, that I probably need reading glasses. Okay, so that's basically it. That's just one of those that is a good one to practice, so that you practice having measured stitch lengths. And okay, so that's the back stitch. And you'll want to tie off after each one that you do so you don't have a crisscross all along the back. It will show through, especially through white fabric like this. So you can just loop back under a previous thread to make a knot. And it helps, but it's not required if you have some small scissors like this, so that you can cut those threads in the back. All right, we'll move on to the next one now. All right, so we're back. We're gonna do a quick reminder of the split stitch. And so I've come up through the back and made one stitch, and then I'm coming back up in the middle of the stitch. So I'll show you how that's gonna look. So I'm gonna go forward one stitch. Hopefully this is ringing a bell for those of you who have attended embroidery workshop before. If not, this is a good one to get started with. So I'm just coming up, I'm splitting the stitch, and I'm going between the layers of, or between the threads of the embroidery thread. And I'm gonna go one stitch forward. And so I'm coming up from the back, and I've made the stitch long so that you can hopefully see it better. And this is where those reading glasses would really come in handy, since I'm obviously did not realize how blind I was. but you do want to come up in between. There's 6 strands in the embroidery thread, and you want to try to split them evenly so that your stitch looks nice and even. Okay, I'm going to go forward again. And then come up from the back, right in the middle of the stitch and the strands. And you can see that gives you a nice textured pattern. I'll do a few more just so that you can see how that's going. So go 1 stitch forward. And remember, you're not pulling it super taut each time. You're going to leave it a little bit loose so you have some wiggle room to work with. Okay, and that's the split stitch. You can continue practicing that, and we'll move on to another one right after this. Okay, we're going to go to the next stitch, and it's the threaded running stitch. So it starts with a running stitch, and then when you get to the end of your line, you're going to come up from the back, right on top of the last stitch that you made, but not splitting anything, just right on it, and come through gently. And then since you've come up on this side of this stitch, you're going to go down on the next stitch, and then you're going to continue that down the line. So if we're down on the bottom of this stitch, I'm going to start on the bottom and come back up. And keep going on down. And again, you want to remember that you're not pulling super tight. You don't want to stitch through your fabric, which can be kind of easy to do with this really loose fabric, so just make sure you're going under the thread only. All right, so that's the threaded running stitch. And next we'll do a whipped back stitch. And so it starts with a back stitch, just like we did up here. So when you get to the end of that line, you're going to do the same thing that you did with the threaded running stitch and start at the last stitch right onto one side of that last stitch. So I'm going to come up on what will be the top of that stitch. And then here's where it's going to be different from the threaded running stitch, is it's going to go from the bottom. So if I'm coming out on the top, I'm going to go to the bottom, the next stitch, and go under it and come up. And then I'm just going to keep doing that on back down the line. So always going to the bottom again instead of alternating. And if you've done just a basic whip stitch and sewing, obviously this is the same concept. And again, you want to make sure that you're not catching the fabric in there, but you're just going underneath the last stitch. I'm getting some of that loose thread out of there. And that's what it looks like all finished. I think that is a good stopping point for this first video. So you've gotten to practice some old things or some of the more basic things, and then moved on to some different newer things. And if you're interested, I will continue to do these. So let us know in comments or messages that this is something that you want, and we'll make it happen. Again, if there's anything else that you're interested in, let us know, and we will try to do that too. And as far as supplies for this, one thing that you can keep in mind, as I mentioned at the beginning, is you don't have to have anything special. I do have an embroidery hoop, and I've got a large-eyed needle, but if you're intrepid and you want to try with whatever you have at home, you can do these stitches with different kinds of thread too. You could split it down so that you only have 2 strands of the thread with a smaller eyed needle and a more closely woven fabric. But anything that you try, share it with us. We would love to see it, and we'll catch you on the next video. Take care.